Standardized deficit. A second alternative way to represent the deficit is to recognize the distinction between short-run factors that affect government spending and revenue, and the standardized or structural budget deficit that reflects longer-term trends in the government's fiscal position. The standardized deficit is computed by the Congressional Budget Office (CBO) in two steps. First, it accounts for the impact of the business cycle on the deficit. When there is a recession, tax receipts fall as household and corporate incomes decline, and the many government expenditures that are linked to the well being of households and corporations, such as the cost of benefits provided to unemployed workers, rise. Both of these factors tend to increase the deficit in the short run, but over the long run, they should be balanced by the rise in receipts and the decline in spending that occurs during periods of economic growth. Sidebar: Standardized structural budget deficit, a long-term measure of the government's fiscal position with the short-term factors removed. Uh, Cyclically adjusted budget deficit, a measure of the government's fiscal position if the economy were operating at full potential GDP. Returning to the text. To account for these factors, the Congressional Budget Office computes a cyclically adjusted budget deficit. The Congressional Budget Office starts with its baseline projection of revenues and outlays, captures which captures business cycle effects and other factors. It then estimates how much revenue loss and spending increase are due to the economy's deviation from the full potential GDP. The economy's output if all resources were employed as fully as possible. For example, in 2003, the Congressional Budget Office calculated that the baseline budget deficit was $375 billion. $70 billion of that deficit occurred because of the slow economy, so that the cyclically adjusted deficit was only $305 billion. Similarly, in 2000, though the baseline budget surplus was $236 billion, $93 billion of that was due to the economy growing at a rapid rate. Thus, the cyclically adjusted surplus was only $143 billion that year. The second step in computing the standardized budget deficit is to take the cyclically adjusted deficit and further modify it to take into account the other short-lived factors. These factors include fluctuations in tax collections due to short-run factors, changes in the inflation component of net interest payments, and temporary legislative changes in the timing of revenues and expenditures. In 1998, for instance, the cyclically adjusted surplus was $35 billion, but the Congressional Budget Office determined that $67 billion of revenue was coming from temporary effects, such as the increase in capital gains tax revenue, the tax revenue raised on sales of capital assets such as stocks. This increase in revenue was reviewed as a temporary response of stock sales to a rapidly rising stock market. Taking account of this, the standardized budget surplus became a deficit of $32 billion. A better measure of the government's long-term fiscal health measure, Figure 4-2, compares the baseline budget surplus slash deficit with the cyclically adjusted and standardized surplus slash deficit over time.